What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the shop, where today we're going to be doing a full test and review on this Miller Spectrum 375 plasma cutter. So let's get this thing out of the box and see what it can do. So before we get started, I just want to point out that I'm borrowing this plasma cutter from a good friend of mine. This is not a paid endorsement. This is just me telling you what I think. I mean, if Miller were paying me to do this, would Lincoln be in the background? All right, so let's take a look at what all we've got here. Obviously, we got the plasma cutter itself, and it comes with a Miller XT30 torch. We've got our ground clamp here, which this is a pretty light gauge wire in the welding world, but plasma cutters really don't need a huge ground wire like welders do, so not a big deal there. Now, the XT30 consumable kit doesn't come with the machine, but if you're gonna buy the machine, you better buy this as well because you're gonna need it, as well as the water separator and filter, I believe, are sold separately. So what is a Spectrum 375? Well, this Miller's mid-level plasma cutter. It's rated to cut up to 3/8 of an inch. Expect to pay around $1,500 for this thing. And before you leave in the comments how cheap you found it, if you're gonna do that, leave a link so other people can get it that cheap too. Anytime I do a tool review or any kind of review like this, people like to tell me how much cheaper they found it. That's great, but if no one else can get it that cheap, no one cares. Did that sound harsh right there? So the Spectrum 375 is actually a dual voltage machine, meaning that it will run off of either 115 standard household outlet power or 220. Today, we're only going to be testing it on 220. In my experience, whenever you have a dual voltage machine, it's just a joke how it runs on 110. So to me, it's really not worth it. We're just going to be running 220 today. So the face of the machine really couldn't be any simpler. We've just got our port here for our ground cable. Our torch comes out here, obviously. And then we've got our dial here to set the heat. You've got 4 indicator lights here that I guess are just tell you if there's a problem or if you're powered on or what. So, I mean, that's about all there is to it. It's, like I said, can't get much simpler than that. A quick peek underneath the Spectrum 375 will show us a little bit more information about it. Mostly what I'm looking for down here is duty cycle, and it looks like at 240 volts, 30 amps, we've got a 35% duty cycle. So real quick, when I say a 35% duty cycle, it's important to know what that means. It actually surprises me how many people aren't really familiar with what a duty cycle is. So a duty cycle is a percentage based off of how many minutes out of 10 minutes the machine can run at full bore, just nonstop. So like for this example, if we had the amperage turned all the way up and we're just plasma cutting straight, we could run that machine for 3.5 minutes before it would start overheating. So 3.5 minutes out of 10, that's where 35% comes from. Now, 3.5 minutes doesn't sound like that long, but when you think about it for a plasma cutter, that's probably more than enough. The only time that I think that would be a problem is if you were trying to hook this up to a plasma table and it's just pumping out parts all day long. It's not gonna work for that. You would need something with a much higher duty cycle. But for what this machine's intended for, 35% is plenty. The XT30 torch that comes with this machine can be set up in one of 2 ways. The first way is with the standard cutting tip. And the second way is with this drag tip. So the standard cutting tips are great for like artwork or cutting out really intricate designs, but over time I've just really started to like the drag tips because you can't accidentally ground them out when you're cutting metal out. But for like making long cuts on sheet metal or anything like that, these drag tips are definitely the way to go. Well, that's about all there is to say about this machine. The only thing left to do now is to test it out. I think the number one thing that most people want to know about any kind of plasma cutter is how thick of metal it will cut, because there's always what it's rated for and then what it'll actually do. So I've devised a little test here. We're going to start at 1/4 inch, which it should be able to do no problem because it's rated for 3/8. We'll try 1/2, 3/4, and if it does that, we've got a 1 inch piece here. So with that being said, let's fire this thing up and see what it'll do. Test number 1, 1/4 inch. As expected, 1/4 inch was no problem. It flew right through it. Let's move on to 3/8. All right, so we made it through 3/8. Honestly, it didn't cut it as cleanly as I thought it would. I tried to go as slow as I could, but we'll still step it up and we'll try 1/2 inch. All right, we made it through 1/2 inch. I mean, I'll definitely speed that footage up because you have to go so slow, just about the same speed you go when you weld. I mean, you gotta go really slow, but it will do it. Man, I did not think that was gonna work, but we did make it through 3/4. What I had to do is just move the gun, maybe 1/16 of an inch, and wait. Move it, wait, move it, wait. That's the only way I could get all that metal to clean out of there. It's not a pretty cut, but it did make it. So let's check it out. I don't think there's any way it's gonna make it through the 1-inch plate, but it's here. Let's try it. All right, well, we found the limit. It will not cut through 1 inch. It tried, just couldn't quite make it. All right, well, we didn't make it through 1 inch, but we still made it up to double the capacity of what this machine is rated for, so that's pretty good. So now that we got the thickness test out of the way, let's play around with some sheet metal and just kind of get a feel for what this thing will do. For this test, we're just going to use some 12-gauge sheet metal. Just try cutting out some shapes, cutting out some pictures, you know, kind of the artsy kind of stuff that people like to do with plasma cutters. All right, so one thing that I immediately noticed when cutting out the sheet metal is look how fine of a line that thing cuts. That's really great for like detailed work and that kind of thing. So what's the verdict? All in all, I am really impressed with this little plasma cutter. This thing is actually pretty awesome. For something that's barely bigger than a loaf of bread, it's amazing all the different stuff that it can do. If you're in the market for a new plasma cutter, I would definitely take a look at a Spectrum 375. Thanks for hanging out in the shop with me this morning, guys, and I hope I'll see you again on Farmer Tyler Ranch.